Okay, welcome to the Office of Undergraduate Research Education Series. Today's presentation is Stress Care, and our speakers are Sabeth Jackson and Kay Collins. Today's event is virtual and it's being recorded, so we ask that people keep their camera off and mute yourself for the best experience. And if you have any questions, please use the chat feature or unmute yourself when you're invited by the speaker. The event evaluation, we would like everybody to fill that out after the presentation, but especially the Europe scholars, so you can receive credit for attending the event. And this is the QR code, and I will put the link in the chat feature. The mission for the Office of Undergraduate Research is to facilitate and promote undergraduate, student, faculty, collaborative research and creative works in all disciplines throughout the University of Utah campus. In recognition that excellence requires diversity, we pursue this mission through equitable programming that promotes diverse representation and social justice. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. And now today's speakers, I will let them introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sabeth Jackson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Director of Prevention Education at the Center for Student Wellness.
My name is Kay Collins. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a health educator at the Center for Student Wellness. So I want to share about CSW's Center for Student Wellness's mission. We support students' well-being and success through holistic and inclusive programs that center wellness, safety, and healing. So you can kind of think of our office in kind of two different main programs. We have education, and so you're here today participating in one of our workshops. We provide workshops on the topics of harm reduction, sexual wellness, violence prevention, and emotional well-being. And then our other side of the office is our victim survivor advocacy. This is a great resource for anybody on campus because we serve staff, faculty, and students who have experienced relationship, domestic, dating violence, stalking, sexual harassment. We're a confidential office where we can help you proceed in your way of healing and provide different options of ways to move forward and heal.
So as we go through the presentation today, there are a few key ideas that we hope that each of you will take away from today's presentation. We also invite questions. So if folks want to put questions into the chat as we're going, feel free to do that and we can address those as we're working. But the key things that we've outlined that we want to cover today are to define stress and identify some personal stressors for each of you. We've got some worksheets that we'll share with you. We want to learn about how stress affects our bodies and how our perception of this impacts our health. We want to learn about ways to cope with stress, and we also want to learn about resources that are available to students at the U.
Yeah. So to start off, we're going to be talking about stress a lot. So we want to be on the same page of a working definition. So for those who are comfortable unmuting or opening up the chat function, what is stress? We've most likely all have experienced it before in our life, but sometimes it can be hard to pinpoint like exactly what that is. So while you're thinking about stress, please unmute yourself or drop your definitions into the chat. So when we were coming up with our definition, we wanted to recognize that a lot of times we think of stress as this negative thing, something to avoid, something that you should not be experiencing. But stress itself can be positive, negative, or even neutral, depending on how much you're experiencing and how intensely you're responding to those stressors. And so for our workshop today, we're defining stress as just simply a reaction to a stimuli that disrupts our physical or mental equilibrium. We've got a definition in the chat. According to Google, stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So even Google plays into this idea that stress is negative. It's something you want to stay away from. And it's going to cause tension. And that's true because it can be true because stress often triggers this fight or flight response, which is when the hormones adrenaline and cortisol start surging through our body and we get this extra boost of energy and a lot of different other physiological effects from it. But like I said, throughout this presentation, we might be able to view stress maybe not just as a negative thing, but also how to utilize it for our benefit.
Yeah, so we like to talk about stress as a spectrum because stress is not always necessarily a negative thing. So this diagram does a good job of kind of describing how our level of stress can impact our performance. So when we're at a really low level of stress, our performance may actually not be that great because we're not really being challenged. So when you kind of get up to the yellow area called eustress, that's kind of the sweet spot. That's where we're doing something or we're dealing with something that is challenging us a bit, but our skills and abilities are able to meet the challenge. So we are able to grow and we're able to experience a level of excitement that kind of comes with eustress. So you could think about that. Some examples might be starting a new job that you're really excited about and needing to learn some new things to do that. Maybe like taking a new class or starting a new degree program that you're really excited about, or maybe even going on a date for the first time with someone and kind of like the excitement and also stress of like how that new relationship might be unfolding. But then the red side, when we get into distress, that's when our abilities are not really able to meet the demands that we're facing. And so then our performance starts to decline. We start to feel some of the more negative physiological effects of stress, and emotional levels also are impacted. So some examples of things that might cause that might be like a chronic health issue, or maybe dealing with helping to support a family member who's sick. So many people experienced some really distressing conditions as a result of the pandemic, and maybe job loss, things like that could cause a level of distress. So I wanted to check in with the folks that are participating here and just ask people who feels like they have something stressing them out right now. So you can just put something in the chat. You can say me or yes or whatever, just to give us a sense of like, where are people at right now? Yeah, I mean, I can say that I'm under stress right now. I think that it's pretty normal. And we all experience some level of stress most of the time. It's hard to find an environment or a situation where we're not experiencing any stress. So the key, and what we're going to talk about a little bit more here, is what we can do to reduce some of the negative consequences of stress, to maybe give ourselves some some more tools and skills that we can use to help manage stress when it comes up for us, and also just to change kind of the way we think about it. There are some negative consequences to long-term stress. And I think a lot of these are things that people are familiar with just because this is the way that stress is often talked about in our culture. Long-term ongoing stress can cause increases in anxiety or depression for people, can also cause some health issues, like maybe digestive problems is a common one that people experience, or muscle tension that can lead to headaches. And the list goes on. But we don't want to focus on all the negative things. We really want to empower you all with some information that can help you to move forward in a positive way. And so, and we also just want to acknowledge that everybody's response to stress, the things that cause stress for us, and also the things that work to help us move through stress are different. So we're going to talk about some more individual ways that we can address those things.
So I am putting into the chat the stress care handout. You can access it through this bit.ly link, case sensitive, so capital SC-worksheet, or you could scan the QR code that will take you there. And this should be a fillable handout. And so we want to take a few moments to consider our own thoughts and actions and how stress shows up in those. So you'll notice the first column is thoughts and actions I notice. So consider what are things that you feel or think or do when you're in the lower area of stress. And consider how that changes when you're in that mid-stress. And then lastly, considering those personal indicators in those higher levels of stress. So I hope we're all able to access this worksheet, and we're going to spend a little bit of time filling that out. So we can consider a couple of dimensions of our wellness. Maybe our physical well-being is impacted. Maybe where we're in low stress, we're able to do Zumba or your own personal favorite way of movement. But maybe when you start getting in mid-stress, you start having difficulty sleeping, and then you're in high stress and you just kind of have headaches all day. Those might be ways that physically stress may be showing up. Or maybe emotional, maybe we start getting more irritable, or maybe we're reacting to situations disproportionately or in ways that we wouldn't typically do if we weren't under that same stress. Also consider how your social well-being is impacted. Is there a decrease in social activities? Or is there this mindset of being afraid to take time away to nurture relationships because kind of your identity and the stress is all wrapped up into this one event? And also consider your academics. Are you losing motivation as you start entering that mid or high level of stress? Is it harder to focus? So think back on times that you've been in the low stress, mid stress, and high stress, and just identify a couple of thoughts and actions that you may have. And if you're open to sharing to everybody participating, drop into the chat some ideas that you're having. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to fill out that first column. Later on in this presentation, we'll come back and go through that actions and supports I can utilize. But for now, we're just kind of checking in with ourselves and noticing what are some behaviors or feelings we experience. Is anyone feeling vulnerable to share kind of some of the things that are standing out to them with this worksheet? Sleep is definitely impacted when the mid and high stress. So maybe it's harder to fall asleep when you're in the mid stress, and then in high stress, it's harder to stay asleep. Ooh, tend to get sick. Yeah, so noticing there's that mental and body connection of you start getting sick more, your immune system is decreasing, and we'll kind of go into the physiological reasons behind that. But there is definitely science to back that up. Yeah, mental health declines. Let's see here, we have another one. I find it hard to enjoy myself when I'm in low stress. Nice, that even when you're in low stress, it can be stressful that you might be taking on and saying yes to too many things and not really paying attention to maybe preventing things piling up in the future when it comes to like commitments or dates. And I appreciate the reaching out for support when need to. That can be hard sometimes. Yes, social contact, responding to messages, maybe, that we're in that calm state of stress when we get a message from day to day. Oh yeah, I can reply to this email. But when we're in those mid and high stress, that behavior that was once in the calm might be becoming a little more distressing because it's our perceived abilities to meet that demand. So, oh no, another decision. Oh no, another message I have to craftily, create. We also have noticing that eating habits are disrupted. At a low and mid stress, you have a better routine. In your brain, it might be asking for different types of foods when you're in that low versus high. Maybe it's, wanting some more sugars. So I really thank everybody for checking in with yourselves. And because it's important to do that regularly, because it's sometimes hard to notice when your stress signs are showing up, or it could be easy to even like dismiss them in the moment, or even not notice as stress builds. And so catching things early can really help manage the stress, and it allows us, have more time to reach out to resources and support before we start getting into that red zone. And so hopefully it can prevent us from getting worse and feeling that impact emotionally and physically.
Okay, so we've talked about what stress is, and we've talked about some of the ways that it shows up in our lives. We know that we can't avoid stress, that it is a normal part of life, but we can control to some degree how we respond to stress. And what we're talking about here is specifically like non-traumatic events that are stressful, maybe day-to-day stressors. So there's some pretty universal, we mentioned earlier on that stress can trigger kind of a cascade of hormones in the body. And there's some pretty universal ways that our bodies respond to stress. So for most people, when they feel stressed, they notice maybe their heart's beating a little bit harder, their circulation starting to increase. That's part of the fight or flight system, really getting you prepared for action. We might also notice that we're breathing a little bit faster, and that's also part of that system, which is just helping to get more oxygen into our bodies. So there's a really great, I encourage everyone to check this out if you have time. There's a really great TED Talk by a health psychologist and a Stanford lecturer named Kelly McGonigal, and it's called How to Make Stress Your Friend. And so this is a graphic that I got after checking out her TED Talk. And so she's like some really great research that backs up kind of like what our perceptions are really has a huge impact on what happens when we're stressed. So she cites a study of 30,000 Americans who were asked, who reported that they felt very stressed over the course of a year. And the ones who said that they believed that that stress was bad for their health were 43% more likely to die. And that's for a number of different reasons. So, someone mentioned earlier that when they're stressed, they feel like they get colds more easily. That's because cortisol actually suppresses our immune system. So if you're experiencing high levels of cortisol all the time, your immune system is suppressed to a certain degree. We also know that that increase of your heart rate when you're stressed, if you look at this this graphic here on the slide on the left hand side, that's if we have a negative view of stress. Research has actually shown that our blood vessels will be more constricted, and so when we have an increase in blood flow because of that physiological response to stress, the constricted blood vessels will actually put more pressure on our cardiovascular system, and over time can cause some damage. So that's one of the reasons why these people were more likely to die, because of their belief that the stress was bad for them. So she also cites a study, this one comes from Harvard, that taught participants that their physical responses to stress would actually, and this was to a social stress test, would actually be helpful for their performance. So the ways that they talked about that were like, when you notice your heart rate increasing, that's preparing you for action. When you notice that you're breathing heavier, that's supplying more oxygen to your brain so that you're quicker on your feet. And so the people who believed that their physiological response to stress was beneficial for them, what happened was their blood vessels stayed relaxed. So they were still experiencing the physiological symptoms of stress, but they were in a more relaxed state. So it wasn't causing damage to their system. And what it ends up kind of looking like is courage on the one hand, when we're like, okay, we're up to the task. Our body is prepared and is helping us to work on this really difficult thing, versus a more tense state when we're afraid and we're not sure if we're going to be able to do it.
Okay, how are we feeling after that information? Sometimes hard to like hear for the first time that, oh, my brain perception plays a big impact of the way that my body is experiencing stress. It can kind of feel a little more stressful. And we've been talking kind of a lot about stress and specifically like how it shows up in our body. So let's just take a moment and do a little mindfulness activity. Let's first kind of like check in with ourselves. How comfortable are we feeling? Are we noticing any increase of heart rate? How does it feel sitting in the space that you're in right now? Might be feeling a little bit elevated. So let's do a breathing exercise. So if everybody could hold out their hand in kind of a spread out shape. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to be tracing our fingers. And as we go up, we're going to be breathing in through our nose. We're going to hold for a minute as we get to the tip of our finger. And then we're going to exhale as we go down. And when we're in the valley between the fingers, we can hold that. Breathe in through your nose, hold. Breathe out through your mouth, hold. So if you wouldn't mind joining me, no one can see you, so you can have your hands out. And so at your own pace, feel comfortable, or you can follow along with me. And we're just going to spend a few minutes silently breathing. Alrighty, you might have finished one round of hand. Let's do it one more time, and let's really think about the way that feeling of your index finger, how that feels gliding across your skin, and also kind of feel that breath as you breathe in. That's your body's way of bringing oxygen to your brain so that you can be alert and aware right now. So one more time with your other hand. Last breath. I already feel a lot calmer and things are kind of a slower pace. How are you feeling right now? Now check back into your body and see, do you feel a difference before and after that breathing exercise? Might still be kind of sitting in that calmness and stillness. So, along with changing our perceptions of our body's response to stress, it is still really important to utilize stress management and self-care techniques to help us cope. Because like we said, stress is a normal part of life, and we're not trying to avoid it, but we're wanting to learn to cope effectively and seek out support and help when we can't manage it on our own. So this will help us maintain that overall emotional well-being. So again, kind of how everyone responds differently to stress at different times, kind of thinking about that, responding to messages that, it might be a calm activity when you're in low stress, but then increases. So the way that we experience and manage and cope with stress is going to be different. It's going to be different between each other, and it's going to be different from the situation. So here are a few tips to consider when considering stress management. Considering, managing your time, stressors, reaching out for support, eating, sleeping, and be active, as well as being mindful. So one way is to manage stress is to find a system that works for you to prioritize what work you need to focus on first. And so we have provided this bit.ly link and QR code to a U-Box folder. You'll find the Recognizing and Preparing for Stress worksheet. You'll also find a campus resource handout. And then there's also a folder that includes a couple of worksheets that we're mentioning on this slide. So the Eisenhower matrix, like I said, is created by the former president. Like I said, it's in that U-Box that you can access now or at another time. And it's a very helpful way to take a long list of to-dos and figuring out what needs your attention first. So it's kind of like a grid where what is high priority and what needs your attention, and do you have that capacity? So that's one way that you can manage time stressors. We've also included kind of a stress questionnaire that might help us identify where our stressors are coming from. So some forms of stressors for time may be experiencing a lot of interruptions. You may be experiencing procrastination. You might be doing more things than you actually have time doing. And so that questionnaire can help you specifically address, like, what is it about time? Is it that I don't have enough time? Or is it these other things that are coming up that I might need to specifically address? So reaching out for support, we're going to go into a little bit more detail in what support resources are available to you as students, but recognizing that they don't have to always be professional help that you reach out to, that your support systems, whether they're friends, peers, family, professors, that when we reach out for support, we're doing our body a good service, because we release the hormone oxytocin, which is a natural anti-inflammatory. And so it can really help us mitigate some of those negative impacts. And so it's really like hardwired in us to have that need and desire to reach out, because we get that physiological calming effect from doing so. And so we'll go into deeper about like how we can communicate our stressors and respond to others when they communicate stressors as well. So that will be up next, but we're going to consider eating, sleeping, and being active, that these are kind of our basic needs that can help us keep our physical wellness pretty steady. And so by not like addressing these basic needs, we may become like hangry. And then that can actually, by not having the food and our blood sugar being at different levels, that we may be more likely and susceptible to experience a panic attack. Because when we both have that emotional and physical stress, we can really become predisposed to a couple of different negative experiences. So again, in that U box, we've included a habit tracker that may be beneficial to help set up some goals and establish some habits. And then when we consider being mindful, we're both considering being mindful in the terms of presence, of practicing mindfulness activities. I really love how diverse mindfulness can be, that they're not always that meditation of being quiet and trying to get your brain completely still. But sometimes there can be those more tactile activities, kind of like that breathing fingers exercise we did. So finding relaxation tools that really help you and to help you cope with stress, as it will allow you to become more calm, to be more present, and to increase that efficacy that you can do this. And then also, when we're being mindful, we want to be mindful of substances, the substances we use and consume, because a lot of substances we use in order to increase our performance. How many of us enjoy a cup of coffee or some other form of caffeine in the morning to help get us our day going, to get us ready and going and start being productive? And so also people may use alcohol or other substances as a form of coping for relaxation. But the effects of alcohol and caffeine and other substances can have that real physical damage. So it might help us in the moment, but it would have, for those two specifically, they would have a negative impact on our sleep, that we might get the same hours of sleep, but even then we're not getting that same quality of sleep when we have consumed caffeine or alcohol. And Shelley shared the URL for this U-Box. And then I also enjoy this person who shared that their favorite way to be mindful is to knit and to crochet. I love that. I love how mindfulness and relaxation practices can look many, many different ways.
Okay, so before we wrap up, what we're going to do is share this video, and this does a great way of helping to illustrate some of the skills that we want to share with you about how you can reach out for social support, or how you can support someone who's reaching out to you. So it's common and encouraged to share with others when we experience stress. Sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes we feel like we're being a burden on other people. Sometimes people feel a need to just say like, oh, it's going to be okay. Things like that. But this video does a really good job of helping to illustrate ways that we can show empathy and validate what someone else is feeling, even if we don't necessarily agree with them. We can provide support, and by doing this, as Kay mentioned before, where we're reaching out for support or whether we're giving it to someone else, we're doing our bodies a favor by helping to increase some of those calming hormones in our bodies that reduce stress on both sides.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy?
Empathy
You got it.
fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, so I'm wondering if folks can share in the chat just some things that stood out to them about this video. One thing that stands out to me is how often I do the "at least" thing and how hard it is to not do that. Yeah, so Sierra said, response doesn't help, connection does. Yeah, and I think sometimes it's helpful for us to even know for ourselves what we're hoping to get out of sharing with someone else. And so if we're approaching sharing from a place of really needing some advice or something like that, it's nice to let people know that. It's also nice to let people know sometimes, like, I don't need a solution. I just want to be able to vent a little bit. And that really can help other people to kind of follow suit and not try to do some of that fixing for us. Does anybody else have any things that stood out to them from the video?
I know I'm more guilty of the, maybe not the "at least," but like trying to share my own, like, oh, I understand your stress because here's my stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm guilty of that too. I think that's part of the validating, the urge to validate is to sort of say like, oh yeah, I've been there too. But sometimes it's helpful to really think about why what your impulse is in wanting to share, and whether that's wanting to let the other person they're not alone, then that's the right reason. So yeah. Well, thanks for sharing the folks who did some of their reflections. Now we're going to move on to a group activity. I think we have enough time to do that, don't we, Kay?
Yeah, so we're going to return back to that workshop we started, or the worksheet that we started at the beginning, where we identified the thoughts and actions that we're noticing. And now that we're kind of equipped with tools of recognizing the way that we perceive stress can play, of the way that the response is impacting us, and also going over some stress management tools. So now that we're equipped with a couple more tools, let's consider that second column. So again, if you hadn't pulled it up, you can pull it up now with the URL or the QR code. It's that same worksheet that I dropped in the chat earlier. And so let's just take a few moments to kind of prepare and like, what can we do in that moment? Because sometimes when we're in that moment of stress, nothing feels good. Well, what can you do to reduce your stress? I don't know. I'm in that moment, you're swept up. But creating a plan can help you navigate those, doesn't put that decision making in the heat of the moment. And even thinking about the ways that you can support yourself, that you can utilize when you're in that low stress. I think someone said that even when they're in that low stress, they make sure that they're communicating with their friends. Does anybody have any ideas that we haven't covered today that they're putting on their list? If so, I would appreciate if you share in the chat, because I think it will be beneficial for all of us. And we can consider those same dimensions of wellness when we consider the thoughts that we notice that when we are stressed. So considering, what can you do to support you physically? What can you do to support yourself emotionally? And your social well-being is just as important as every other aspect of well-being. So how can you keep that still alive? And also, what kind of academic supports could you utilize? We have an example of trying to let my friends and family know so they can support me. And then also recognizing that when we share with those friends and family, that we might not need that solution. We just want to share so that we get that little bit of oxytocin and they get that too. And it's a little bit of connection and feel goods. Sabeth brings up a good point that implementing these habits when we're not stressed gives us practice, gives us that feeling that we can do this. And so getting into those habits and kind of knowing where to potentially turn when you are stressed, that we don't have to be making those decisions in the moment. Yeah, and considering the difference between healthy food versus comfort food. Wow, this is a really cool example that, you kind of live in an environment where everybody is working on this kind of higher level of demands and are, experience a lot of stressors in jobs. And so using a calendar system so that you can communicate, even though you might not be in that, might not have that opportunity to be sharing a physical space together, but there's still ways to reach out for connection. Oh, and also reduces the amount of arguing and frustration, because miscommunication can easily happen when we're in that stress. We start shutting down, we start not reaching out, we might not be replying to messages. And so there's a lot of opportunities for miscommunication to sneak in, as well as, working together and having that chore distribution. And, you've got different areas of your life and they demand different stressors. And sometimes we might forget or deprioritize this other aspect, but being able to communicate that, hey, I'm stressed, so that others know, okay, then maybe I won't expect you to mop the floors this week. And I can hold that compassion. And to kind of boost that last column is that we want to take some time and to consider the campus resources we have. I can also drop this in the chat. So there's the PDF in the chat. You can see what it looks like on this slide. We have that URL as well as the QR code. So I'd highly recommend saving this image somewhere to refer to later. But before I kind of highlight a few of these, I want to ask all of y'all if y'all have reached out to a office on campus for support, and what was that like? It can be really scary to reach out to a new place, to new people, and not quite sure what to expect. So I'm wondering if anybody has any experiences of what it was like to walk into an office and to ask for support. I want to highlight two services that you might not be aware of. Wellness coaching, which is housed here at the Center for Student Wellness, as well as the student success coaches. So they're all there to meet you where you're at, to help you identify and set some goals, to kind of increase that motivation and encouragement, as well as provide some tools for success. So if you have a specific question and don't know where to turn to, these are two great resources that they might not have the resource, but they can definitely find and work with you to get those kind of resources. So those are great starting points. All right, we have somebody who shared that campus resources are great. I remember my first session feeling a little bit unnatural and forced, but with some time you became increasingly more comfortable. I really appreciate you sharing because it can be hard. And I think sharing within your peers that, hey, I have reached out, it was uncomfortable, but I benefited greatly. And I now have this new support system. And some experience counseling through the Women's Resource Center when going through a breakup. And it was a wonderful experience in that they 10 out of 10 recommend. And they were even supportive when you needed to take a break from your academic pursuits. Yeah, so we have a plethora of counseling options. The University Counseling Center and the Women's Resource Center are free for all students, no matter what their identities are. I would like to point out that the Women's Resource Center kind of works from a multicultural kind of feminist perspective, but even though women is in that name, it is available for all identities. There's also My SSP, which is housed underneath the Counseling Center. And so this is a online, virtual, or phone call option that you can get crisis immediate support or also ongoing support. And again, that's free if you're a University of Utah student. So just notifying when you call the therapist that, hey, I'm a student and you shouldn't have to pay for anything. And then there's, I also want to highlight the Behavioral Health Innovation and Dissemination Office and the Utah Community Mental Health Clinic. They're both ran by graduate students and overseen by professionals. So these are available for everyone in the community. If you have a friend or a partner that can't receive that free student counseling, that these two are great options. They have sliding scales and some are as low as $20 per session. And as well as a free initial phone consultation so that you can learn a little bit more before you invest any money. But this is a great resource again for in case you have a community member or a peer or may not have your University of Utah student status. And then these two are not campus resources, but are still really great. The Safe UT, they have an app, is for crisis support, and you can chat with a peer. And then as well as the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This was just released over the summer. This is nationwide. You dial 911, or sorry, just like you dial 911, you can dial 988. And that will get you somebody who is ready to support you in any kind of like emotional or crisis or substance use challenge that you're experiencing. So you can call them, you can text them, or you can go to 988lifeline.org and you can message on your computer there. So those are always a resource for anyone and everyone. And also consider these resources when filling out that second column. Maybe when you're in the high stress, maybe you'll reach out to the student success advocates, or maybe you can log into You at Utah and do a little self-check. And there you can receive crisis support if needed as well. So I believe that's all we have for today.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions for us? And I know we're running up on the end of the time that we have allocated. So if questions come up another time, feel free to reach out to us. You can see our email address here. You can check us out on social media, but we're available and we're happy to workshop if things come up and people want to ask more questions another time.
Well, thank you very much, Kay and Sabeth, for this wonderful presentation. I feel more relaxed already. I just want to remind everybody about the event evaluation. Here's the QR code, and I am dropping it in the chat feature also. We'd love everyone to fill it out, but especially the Europe scholars, so they can receive credit for attending this event. And next slide. And just to remind you about the Office of Undergraduate Research, we're here Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We're at our.utah.edu, or you can email us at our@utah.edu. And thank you again, Sabeth Jackson and Kay Collins. We truly enjoyed this presentation. We will have the recorded presentation on our website next week, and I'll try to include all the handouts also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. I appreciate everyone interacting and being vulnerable and sharing.